Donald Trump Jr. had clung to the belief that a last-minute plea to his father might shield him from what was coming. But the moment Representative Jasmine Crockett introduced a damning chain of evidence directly tying both of them to the scandal, the illusion of protection began to shatter. Within the next 45 minutes, the carefully maintained walls of privilege that had shielded the Trump family for decades would start to fall. Inside the main auditorium of the Rayburn House office building, the air was thick with anticipation. Members of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee filed into their seats as C-SPAN's unblinking cameras panned the room. Rows of spectators, reporters, and analysts packed into the gallery, some having waited since before sunrise. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a moment that had taken 3 months of meticulous investigation to reach. The chamber's walls, lined with polished mahogany panels, seemed to echo with whispers as aides checked microphones and adjusted nameplates. Jasmine Crockett sat at her post, composed and still. The freshman congresswoman from Texas, a former public defender, didn't need to shuffle papers or rehearse talking points. 3 folders, green, yellow, and red, sat before her in perfect order. A glass of water and her tablet were the only other items on her desk. Her simple pearl necklace and navy blazer gave her a look of quiet power. 2 nights earlier, alone in her office well past midnight, Jasmine had received a courier envelope. It was unmarked except for a return address in New York. Inside, she found a stack of documents, whistleblower evidence from inside the Trump Organization. What had previously been a murky inquiry suddenly became clear and undeniable. Jasmine had spent the next 48 hours cross-referencing every line, checking timestamps, and crafting her strategy. While others made headlines with sound bites, she worked in silence, knowing that the time for noise would come, and it would be hers. Her legal background had taught her that the most powerful cases were built not on outrage, but on evidence. For 8 years, she defended people with no money, no clout, people the system ignored. She learned that preparation wasn't just a strategy, it was a weapon. It had carried her through civil rights trials, through the Texas legislature, and now it would be tested on a national stage. At exactly 10 a.m., the chairman called the hearing to order. His voice bounced through the chamber, signaling the beginning of what would soon become historic testimony. This session of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability is now in session. Today's hearing will address possible misconduct related to federal infrastructure contract allocations from January 2022 through March 2023. He spoke like a man unaware of the storm that was about to strike. The cameras swung to the side entrance just as Donald Trump Jr. entered the room. Flanked by a trio of suited attorneys, he strode toward the witness table with a smirk, pausing only to nod at Republican allies. His dark blue suit and red tie made him look like a walking campaign ad, the personification of the Trump brand. He settled into the chair with an air of superiority, adjusting his mic with practiced ease. The chairman's voice cut through the murmurs. Let it be noted that the witness appears today under subpoena, having declined 3 previous voluntary invitations to testify. The comment drew a rustle of acknowledgement across the room. The game had officially begun. Trump Jr. raised his right hand, the gesture exaggerated as if he were being sworn in for a television role rather than a federal hearing. When the oath was complete, he launched into a statement crafted to deflect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today despite this being just another attack on my family, a smear campaign dressed up as oversight. His voice projected certainty, but Jasmine saw it, his posture too rigid, his eyes too alert. The lines were well rehearsed, but the performance was strained. She wasn't watching the words. She was watching his lawyers, especially the one seated to his right, the one who kept stealing glances at her folders. They'd heard something, but they didn't know what. The Trump Organization, Trump Jr. declared, has always held itself to the highest standards. The accusations made here are baseless and politically driven. While he spoke, Jasmine remained motionless. She wasn't reacting. She was reading. His gestures, his water sips, his shifting shoulders. She was mapping his nerves like a seasoned player reading a bluff at a poker table. I'm here to put an end to this witch hunt once and for all, he concluded smugly. The chairman nodded, then signaled the start of member questioning. Republicans went first, offering Trump Jr. a series of safe, rehearsed questions. He grinned, repeated his talking points, and leaned back each time he scored political points with his allies. No one mentioned the contracts. No one asked the hard questions. But Jasmine wasn't here to play politics. Her eyes tracked his reactions. How his fingers twitched when certain names were mentioned. How his tie seemed to tighten around his neck every time someone brought up the Department of Transportation. These were signs she knew well. Truth doesn't hide easily under pressure, the chairman's voice cut through the buzz again. The chair now recognizes Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. The room held its breath. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, placing her fingers on the mic. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She turned toward Trump Jr., her voice calm, controlled. "Mr. Trump, thank you for joining us today. Finally." The word landed lightly, but its meaning was clear. "I'd like to begin with a basic clarification. Could you state your role in the Trump Organization between January 2022 and March 2023? He barely glanced at her. "As is public knowledge, I've served as executive vice president for years. That's hardly relevant to these fictional allegations." Jasmine opened her green folder with care. "Then I'm curious about this investor. Presentation from February 2022, she said, gesturing to a staffer. A slide appeared on the screen behind them. Trump Jr. standing behind a podium, a title displayed boldly behind him. Director of Acquisitions and Government Partnerships. Low murmur spread. Trump Jr. blinked. That was just a one-off title for a specific event. "It's not my formal position." Without missing a beat, Jasmine offered another exhibit. "And yet," she said, "here are 5 visitor logs at the Department of Transportation listing you under that same title over a 6-month span." Trump Jr. scoffed. "Those are just sign-in sheets. They don't mean anything official." But his fingers had started tapping the table. She hadn't even opened the yellow folder yet. Jasmine didn't respond to the deflection. She just watched him, observed the subtle shift in his jawline, the way his thumb grazed the rim of the water glass. That rhythm, tap, pause, sip, was familiar to her. It was the dance of someone trying to stay composed under mounting pressure. "Interesting," she said evenly. "For a title that's supposedly meaningless, you've used it repeatedly inside federal buildings." Her hand turned a single page in the green folder. She wasn't rushing. Every movement was deliberate, the pace measured to maintain control of the narrative. "But let's set that aside for a moment. Mr. Trump, are you familiar with the West Burbridge Development Corporation?" He leaned back slightly in his chair, feigning casual indifference. "It's one of many companies the Trump Organization has worked with over the years. I'm not involved in day-to-day operations, so I can't recall every relationship." Jasmine smiled, faintly, not a smirk, but the subtle kind that suggested she was already 5 steps ahead. "Understandable," she said, her tone light. "But perhaps this will jog your memory." She motioned again and another slide came up. An image of Donald Trump Jr. wearing a construction helmet, standing shoulder to shoulder with the CEO of West Burbridge at a groundbreaking ceremony. Their company logos were printed boldly on their helmets. The room shifted. Conversations dropped. Fingers paused over keyboards. "This photo," she said, letting the image linger, "was taken just 2 weeks after your 5th visit to the Department of Transportation, a time when you were presenting yourself as Director of Government Partnerships." Trump Jr. blinked, lips pressing into a thin line. A single bead of sweat shimmered at his temple, catching the cold light above. He didn't speak. Jasmine didn't press. She simply allowed the silence to work its magic. Silence, she knew, had power. It magnified the weight of evidence and left room for discomfort to take root, and discomfort was growing. Even Republican committee members, once eager to throw him lifelines, now sat with a tense rigidity. One was whispering hurriedly to an aide. Another avoided looking toward the witness table entirely. Trump Jr. shifted again. "With all due respect, Representative Crockett," he began, adopting a sharper tone, "you're wasting valuable time with irrelevancies. My constituents and yours would rather we talk about real issues, illegal immigration, inflation, the economy, not some ceremonial photo. There was a smattering of applause from the gallery. The chairman raised his gavel but didn't immediately strike it. Even he seemed unwilling to disrupt what everyone knew was becoming a pivotal exchange. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, calm as ever. Mr. Trump, I am discussing a very real issue. One that involves the potential misdirection of $1.7 billion in taxpayer-funded infrastructure meant for underserved communities. She turned to the yellow folder. The paper gave the faintest whisper as she flipped it open. Let's be specific. On March 9, 2022, you sent an email to the CEO of West Burbridge. The subject line, Texas Project. The message reads, she gestured to the screen. Just discussed the Texas project with Dad. He suggests we increase the proposal by 15% to cover contingencies. He has good contacts at DOT who can expedite approval. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. On the screen, the full email thread lit up, including the CEO's reply. Excellent news. If DJT thinks we can get another 15%, let's revisit the numbers. Your contacts at DOT have been invaluable. Trump. Jr.'s eyes locked on the screen. His lawyers leaned in closer now, one whispering frantically into his ear. Another scribbled on a notepad, sliding it toward him with urgency. He didn't read it. His hands gripped the arms of the chair just a little too tightly. That email, he said finally, voice tight, is being wildly taken out of context. When I wrote Dad, it wasn't a literal reference to my father. It was a shorthand, like lessons I've learned from him. General business advice. Jasmine let that explanation hang in the air without challenge. Then she asked softly, and what about good contacts at DOT? Is that also shorthand? He adjusted his tie, which now seemed uncomfortably snug. Any large company has contacts. That's how business works in D.C. The justification was growing thinner with every syllable. Across the room, Republican committee members exchanged glances, some skeptical, others clearly disturbed. The atmosphere had shifted. What had started as just another partisan hearing had become something far more dangerous for the witness at its center. Jasmine remained focused. Mr. Trump, did you have any communication with Michael Lemansky during this time? Trump Jr. hesitated. We interact with a lot of people. I don't know every name. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed. Michael Lemansky was the senior official overseeing contract approvals at the Department of Transportation. He worked for the Trump Organization from 2017 to 2021. Does that ring a bell? If you say so, Trump Jr. replied with dismissive tone. I don't handle HR. I wouldn't know. Jasmine didn't blink. Her gaze sharpened, the edges of her voice hardening just slightly. So you wouldn't recall sending him any messages related to West Burbridge? Trump Jr. looked directly at her now. Representative Crockett, he said with clear irritation, you've been in Congress 5 minutes. Maybe if you had experience in the private sector instead of spending your career as, what was it, a public defender, you'd understand how corporate operations work. There was a brief stirring among the committee. The insult was clear. The chairman intervened to remind everyone of decorum. Jasmine didn't flinch. She said nothing. She just stared at him. 15 seconds passed. Trump Jr. shifted again. Wiped his brow. A photographer's camera clicked. A pencil rolled off a desk somewhere behind the dais. The silence made everything louder. And then she spoke. Mr. Trump, she said gently. I spent 8 years representing people who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers. People whose lives were decided by what evidence could prove, not what influence could deny. Then she opened the red folder, and the room stopped breathing. Jasmine's hand moved with calm precision as she opened the final folder, the red one. The weight of it wasn't physical, but everyone in the room felt its significance. From green to yellow to red, the sequence alone was a silent message. We're no longer speculating. We're entering the zone of undeniable evidence. She reached in and withdrew a series of documents with deliberate care, placing them one by one on her desk before handing the top sheet to the committee aide. Please display the following, she instructed. The screen behind the witness table came to life again. This time, it wasn't a photo. It wasn't a public email. It was a string of private text messages. Jasmine cleared her throat, her tone still calm but laced with a quiet gravity. These communications were obtained via judicial warrant, following a whistleblower complaint. They're between you, Mr. Trump, and Michael Lemansky, during the federal review process of the West Burbridge contract. Trump Jr.'s face drained of color almost instantly. The first message read, Trump Jr. Mike, we need to expedite that West Burbridge approval. Dad says you should talk to Collins in the approvals office, use the usual code. Bonus guaranteed when everything's finalized. Lemansky. Understood. Collins already knows what to do. Docs should be approved by Thursday. Does DJT still want to keep that golf meeting on Sunday? Trump Jr. Yes. Sunday is confirmed. Bring the Westbridge documents for him to review. He has some ideas for the adjacent property. Gasps escaped from several corners of the gallery. The murmuring was louder now. Reporters furiously typed updates, some raising their phones to snap photos of the projected messages. Committee members leaned in, jaws tight, eyes scanning every word on the screen. Trump Jr. was frozen, his hands flat on the table, his lips parted but no words forming. His attorneys were no longer hiding their alarm. One was whispering aggressively in his ear. Another scribbled a legal note so quickly the ink streaked. A third lawyer just stared forward, expression blank. Mr. Trump, Jasmine said, never raising her voice. This exchange not only shows active coordination with a federal official during the contract approval process, it also directly references your father's involvement. These are not offhand references, these are plans. I'd like to request a break to consult with counsel, Trump Jr. said suddenly, voice higher and more strained than before. The chairman checked with the parliamentarian. Not permitted during questioning, he replied, voice neutral. Trump Jr.'s breathing was faster now, shallow. His left hand trembled slightly as he reached for the water glass again. The illusion of control, of swagger, had officially cracked. Jasmine continued, the edge in her voice now sharpening slightly. These messages contradict your sworn testimony. You stated clearly, and I quote, my father had no involvement with the West Burbridge contract after leaving office. Would you like to revise that statement now? They're being misinterpreted, Trump Jr. said quickly. Mike is a friend. I use Dad as shorthand for general advice. The golf meeting was personal, purely social. Jasmine paused. And the phrase, he has some ideas for the adjacent property, was that also social? The silence that followed was stifling. One of the Republican committee members stared down at his pen, turning it slowly between his fingers. Others didn't bother hiding their discomfort. For a long moment, Jasmine said nothing. She let the evidence speak. The screen still glowed behind Trump Jr., casting his shadow across the polished table. Then she shifted slightly forward and asked, did you have any communication with Michael Lemansky after this exchange? Trump Jr.'s foot began to bounce, lightly under the table, a motion invisible to most but instantly recognizable to Jasmine. She'd seen it countless times before, the reflex of a man who knows the walls are closing in. I don't recall, he muttered. Let me clarify, she said, her tone steelier now. Michael Lemansky, at the time of these messages, held a senior position at the Department of Transportation. He previously worked for your company. You're telling us under oath that you had no further contact with him about this contract? Trump Jr. hesitated, visibly calculating. Not to the best of my knowledge. The middle attorney placed a hand on Trump Jr.'s forearm, a gesture both supportive and subtly restraining. Jasmine exhaled softly, then shifted the questioning again. Representative Crockett, Trump Jr. said with a forced smile. You're new to Congress. Maybe you don't understand how business is conducted at this level. These kinds of communications are typical. Normal. They don't mean what you think they mean. Jasmine stared at him, silent. The pause stretched long enough for the air conditioning to kick on again. The gentle hum filled the chamber like white noise over a rising tide. Her voice was low when she finally spoke. "Mr. Trump, you're correct. I haven't spent decades in corporate boardrooms, but I have spent years defending clients whose lives were destroyed by systems that treated people like them very differently than they treat people like you." Then she raised her voice, but only slightly. "Let me ask this. Did you or did you not authorize any payment, coded or otherwise, to Michael Lemansky during the contract approval process?" Trump Jr. blinked rapidly. "No, absolutely not." Jasmine nodded. "Then perhaps you can explain this." A new document appeared. On the screen, a bank transfer receipt dated 2 weeks after the message exchange. It was labeled Consulting Bonus, issued from a Trump org-linked account to a holding company registered in Lemansky's wife's name. "No comment," Trump Jr. said immediately. Reporters were already typing furiously. The chairman adjusted his seat. One Democratic member leaned back, slowly folding his arms across his chest. "This transfer," Jasmine said, "took place precisely 2 days after the West Burbridge contract was officially approved." Trump Jr.'s voice cracked slightly. "This is a coordinated smear." "No," Jasmine said. "It's documentation." And then came the final blow, delivered not with force, but with silence. She returned to her seat, folded her hands neatly, let the room spiral around her, because she knew the next round of questioning hadn't even begun, and the foundation had already collapsed. The tremble in Donald Trump Jr.'s hand hadn't gone unnoticed. Jasmine's unshaken demeanor had exposed more than documents. It had exposed his inability to control the moment. Cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer confident or rehearsed, but caught in the raw disarray of a man losing control. His once practiced half-smile was replaced by a clenched jaw and twitching eye. Even his legal team, once orderly and confident, had become a flurry of frantic notes, whispered strategy, and nervous glances toward the committee. The chairman's voice finally broke through the murmur. "Mr. Trump Jr., you will answer all questions unless advised otherwise under committee rules." Trump Jr. glanced at his lawyers, searching for instruction. One leaned in, speaking directly into his ear, and nodded. The middle attorney, who had been scribbling nonstop, now pressed a folded note against Trump Jr.'s palm. He accepted it, with fingers that struggled to stop shaking. Jasmine remained still, not needing to fill the silence. She knew the most powerful part of cross-examination wasn't always the question. It was the gap between exposure and reaction. "The chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett for her remaining time," the chairman announced. Jasmine adjusted her microphone, without a word. The room had gone completely still again, that surreal hush before a final verdict, where even the faint clicks of phone cameras sounded like thunder. "Mr. Trump," she said quietly, "I want to give you the opportunity to clarify one final matter." She slid a small slip of paper toward the committee aide. In a few seconds, a transcript appeared on the screen behind them. "This is from a legally obtained phone conversation between you and your father," Jasmine stated. "Recorded the night before this hearing. It was secured through a judicial warrant following a documented obstruction complaint." Gasps broke from the gallery. Reporters in the front rows leaned so far forward their chairs creaked. Trump Jr.'s face went blank. His attorneys didn't bother to mask their shock. One stood as if to object. But the chairman was already reviewing the process with the parliamentarian. Within seconds, the screen displayed the words in stark black and white: Trump Jr., 10:47 p.m. "Dad, we need to talk about this hearing. Crockett has the text messages. I don't know how she got them, but it's bad." Donald Trump: "What messages?" Trump Jr.: "The ones to Mike about West Burbridge. The ones mentioning you reviewing the documents. It's serious." Donald Trump: "That's ridiculous. Deny everything. Say it's fabricated." Trump Jr.: "I can't. They have the originals from Mike's phone. We need a strategy. I could be facing federal charges." Donald Trump: "Use your lawyers. I wasn't involved." Trump Jr.: "Dad, you were involved. I'm asking for your help here. We need to align our stories or I'm finished. I'm begging you." Donald Trump: "I can't get involved right now. It would be politically disastrous. Follow whatever your lawyers tell you. The committee chamber held its collective breath. No movement. No shifting. No coughing. Just silence. Raw, charged silence. Trump Jr.'s expression had collapsed into something between disbelief and dread. His complexion had turned chalky, lips slightly parted, eyes unable to meet Jasmine's. One of his attorneys reached for his water glass and handed it to him without a word. Trump Jr. clutched it but didn't drink. Jasmine didn't speak for several seconds. She let the image linger on the screen like a scar. Then she said simply, "Mr. Trump, this transcript directly contradicts every answer you've given today." He didn't reply. The chairman leaned toward his mic. "Mr. Trump Jr., do you wish to respond?" Still nothing. His lead attorney stood. "Mr. Chairman, we respectfully request an emergency recess." The chairman checked the clock. "You have 5 minutes remaining. Unless the member yields, questioning continues." The attorney hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Jasmine shifted again, folding her hands neatly. "Mr. Trump, the transcript shows that not only did you lie under oath, but that your father, former President of the United States, was actively engaged in an attempt to coordinate a false narrative." She gave it a beat. "You called him for help, and he refused." Still no answer, but his body language was shouting. His chest heaved with uneven breaths. His right hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Every camera in the room captured the unraveling of a man who had entered with arrogance and was now staring down the barrel of legal consequence. In the gallery, a reporter whispered, "He looks like he's going to pass out." Another replied, "He looks like he knows it's over." Jasmine pressed forward, her voice calm but steady as steel. "Mr. Trump, I ask again, do you wish to revise your testimony regarding your father's involvement?" Trump Jr. finally found his voice. It was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I can't comment on that right now." A flashbulb went off, then another. Cameras fired in a staggered sequence, freezing the image of a man caught in his own web. The chairman intervened again. "We are at the conclusion of Ms. Crockett's time." Jasmine leaned back, her red folder now closed. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said softly. But the echo of her final question, and that damning transcript, still hung in the air like smoke. As the session paused for a recess, the gallery burst into movement, reporters rushing to file, phones dialing, anchors going live. Jasmine remained still, eyes down, reorganizing her notes. For her, the work wasn't over. For Trump Jr., the nightmare had just begun. As the committee recessed, the hearing room erupted into controlled chaos. Reporters dashed into the hallways, phones pressed to their ears, voices low and urgent. Producers from cable news networks were already preparing special coverage. Some, committee members huddled in corners, whispering intently with aides. Others simply stood, staring at the screen where the transcript still hovered like a ghost. But Jasmine didn't move. She stayed at her seat, methodically placing the red folder back in her briefcase, her expression unreadable. She wasn't basking in victory, she wasn't celebrating. She was preparing. Across the room, Trump Jr.'s legal team had collapsed into crisis mode. They surrounded him like a shield, whispering frantically, pointing at tablets, scribbling notes on yellow legal pads. Their confidence, so bold just an hour earlier, had disappeared entirely. One attorney was pacing, another was on the phone, voice hushed but intense. The rest hovered, huddled around their visibly shaken client. Trump Jr. wasn't speaking. He sat with his elbows on the table, hands cradling his forehead, eyes staring at nothing. The sweat at his temple had turned into a sheen. His crisp red tie was slightly loosened, his posture no longer arrogant, but hunched, diminished. Through the open doorway of a side chamber, staffers and security could glimpse what looked like a full-blown emergency strategy session. The door swung halfway shut, but not before one staffer caught a glimpse of Trump Jr., slamming his palm against the table, his face contorted in panic. It wasn't political theater anymore. This was damage control in real time. Meanwhile, outside the hearing room, the media had already declared a bombshell. On social platforms, Jasmine's quote, "When the truth finally comes to light, not even a powerful father can rewrite history," was being shared by the second. Memes, headlines, live streams, and trending hashtags began circling the globe. More Crockett receipts was now the #1 trend in the U.S. Inside the committee chamber, though, the contrast was stark. Jasmine's calm was unshaken. While aides refreshed water pitchers and straightened chairs, she opened her tablet and began reviewing her next set of notes. A veteran committee aide approached her quietly. "In 20 years," he murmured, leaning down. "I've never seen questioning that clean." Jasmine glanced up, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thanks, but it's not over." Exactly 24 minutes later, the chairman returned. The room filled back to capacity in seconds. Journalists rushed in. Phones were set to silent. The air held the same charge as it had earlier, but now it was heavier, more sobering. The theater was gone. What remained was something closer to reckoning. When Trump Jr. re-entered, his posture was slightly more upright, but only because his lead attorney was now seated beside him, shoulder to shoulder, guiding every move. The two other lawyers remained close, scanning every document, nodding or scribbling furiously. There would be no more improvisation. The chairman called the hearing back to order and recognized the next Republican committee member, who awkwardly tried to shift the tone. "Let's turn our attention to the economic benefits of the Trump organization's infrastructure initiatives," he began, his voice stiff. Trump Jr. responded, but the words didn't carry the same force. He was distracted, eyes constantly drifting toward Jasmine's seat. Each question required a pause, a whisper from counsel, and a cautious reply. Gone was the bravado. Gone was the smirk. The damage had been done. 2 more committee members followed, each carefully avoiding the scandal now engulfing the hearing. But the tension never eased. Everyone was waiting for Jasmine's return for the next blow. When the chairman finally said, "The chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett of Texas for her second round of questioning," the air in the room shifted. Again, chairs creaked. Journalists sat up straight. Phones were pointed at the front of the room. Jasmine leaned forward and adjusted her microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She turned to Trump Jr., who was now visibly struggling to maintain composure. He wouldn't meet her gaze. Instead, he stared at the space just in front of her desk as if hoping to avoid being drawn into another unraveling. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice measured, "during our brief recess, did your attorneys inform you of the legal consequences of providing false testimony to Congress?" Instantly, his lead attorney objected, rising halfway from his seat. "Mr. Chairman, that question crosses into attorney-client privilege." The chairman consulted the parliamentarian briefly, then sustained the objection. Jasmine didn't blink. "Let me rephrase," she said smoothly. "Are you aware, Mr. Trump, that lying to Congress under oath is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison?" Trump Jr. swallowed. "I'm aware of the law," he said stiffly. His lawyer now had a hand placed firmly on his arm, as if to anchor him. "Good," Jasmine replied. "Then I'd like to give you an opportunity to clarify something important. Earlier today you stated your father had no involvement in the West Burbridge contract. Would you like to revise that answer now?" Trump Jr. cleared his throat. "As I explained before, any mention of my father was informal. It wasn't involvement in the legal sense." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "When was the last time you asked your father for help with a business decision?" Trump Jr. saw this as a chance to recover. "I keep him informed," he said confidently. "He's my father. It's normal for me to update him. But I don't ask for help. I run my operations independently." Jasmine nodded slowly, as if the answer was expected. Then she handed another slip to the aide. "Please display the following exhibit." The screen came alive again. "This," Jasmine said, "is a transcript of a phone call between you and your father. It was recorded the night before this hearing, obtained through a federal warrant." The gallery gasped for the second time that day. Trump Jr.'s expression went blank. His lawyers froze. The screen began to scroll through the now infamous conversation, the one where he pleaded for help, the one where his father told him coldly that he was on his own. No one made a sound. Cameras clicked in sequence, and Trump Jr. sat motionless, his expression slowly collapsing into quiet horror. Trump Jr. remained frozen, his eyes locked on the screen as the words from the phone transcript scrolled in real time. There was no hiding anymore. Not behind lawyers. Not behind the Trump brand. Not even behind his father. The committee chamber was engulfed in absolute silence, the kind that descends not after an explosion but after realization, after the truth walks in, undeniable and stark. The words were there for all to see. "Dad, you were involved. I'm begging. You need to help me get out of this." And his father's cold reply, "I can't get involved right now. It would be politically disastrous." No one dared move. Jasmine, as composed as ever, let the silence speak for itself. Then she leaned forward and, with the same surgical calm that had carried her through hours of interrogation, delivered the final blow. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice a razor-wrapped, in velvet, "when the truth comes forward, when the evidence finally emerges, not even a powerful father can rewrite it." It was the line, the one that would ricochet through headlines, newscasts, social feeds, and history books. The line that didn't just end his testimony, it buried it. Trump Jr. didn't answer. He couldn't. His lips moved slightly. But no, words came. His lead attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering something quietly. The only response Trump Jr. could offer was a slow blink, as if he couldn't process that the walls had finally collapsed around him. The room remained silent for several moments longer, until the chairman, visibly rattled, announced the end of the session's public questioning. But before he could fully adjourn, the lead attorney stood and addressed the committee. "Mr. Chairman, given the developments here today, and upon consultation with legal counsel, my client wishes to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination for the remainder of this hearing." A collective murmur spread across the chamber. It wasn't outrage or protest, it was the sound of inevitability. Everyone understood what had just happened. The invincible had been cornered. The heir to political and financial power had just pleaded silence in the face of undeniable evidence. The chairman conferred briefly with staff, then nodded. "So noted. The committee will recess while we determine next steps in light of today's revelations." Jasmine quietly closed her folders and began packing her notes. Her motions were as controlled as they had been hours ago. There was no triumph in her expression, no smile for the cameras, only focused determination. She hadn't come for spectacle, she'd come for accountability. Meanwhile, Trump Jr. remained seated, slouched and slack-jawed, while his lawyers huddled close. The commanding presence he'd walked in with was gone, replaced by a visibly aged man, shaken to the core. One photographer later described it as watching a man age 10 years in 10 minutes. The image would soon appear on the front pages of newspapers across the country. Trump Jr. caught in the exact moment where denial could no longer save him. His face pale and defeated, and Jasmine's, resolute and composed, would be placed side by side in a stunning visual of truth confronting power. Outside the hearing room, reporters packed the hallway, struggling to keep up with the story as it unfolded in real time. Cable news anchors were already speaking over each other, panels debating the legal implications of the transcript. Commentators from both sides of the political aisle couldn't deny what had just happened. Back inside the chamber, Jasmine remained at her seat for a moment longer, reviewing her notes one last time. One Democratic colleague leaned over and whispered, "How did you even get that transcript?" She looked up, calm and unflinching. "You follow the paper trail, you do the work, and eventually evidence finds you." Her voice wasn't proud. It was tired. Not from the fight, but from how long it takes to get the truth to the surface in a system built to bury it. Down the hall, Trump Jr. and his team disappeared into a private meeting room. Security stood nearby, and staffers moved quickly to block the cameras from following. Through the crack in the door, the sounds of raised voices leaked out, Lawyers arguing, phones ringing, and the sound of a tablet hitting the floor. Whatever illusion of control had remained, it had shattered. One of Trump Jr.'s lawyers was already on the phone with additional legal counsel. Another was texting furiously. And Trump Jr. himself? Slumped in a leather chair, eyes blank, watching. His career, his protection, and his future unravel in real time. Meanwhile, Jasmine returned to her office alone. Her staff didn't follow her immediately. She placed her folders on the desk and glanced at the wall where a photo of her grandmother hung, a quiet reminder of the path that had brought her here. She took a breath. Deep, slow, measured. Her phone buzzed continuously. Interview requests, social media mentions, texts from party leadership. Her chief of staff finally entered. Eyes wide. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. They all want you tonight. Jasmine nodded, not looking up from her desk. Tell them maybe tomorrow. The aide blinked. But ma'am, after what you just did, she cut him off gently. The evidence speaks for itself. Then she reached for a notepad. And I still have constituent calls to return. Her chief of staff stood there for a moment, unsure whether to push back. But then he saw it, the unwavering focus. The same gaze that had turned hours of testimony into a reckoning. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. And he left, quietly closing the door behind him. Outside, camera crews gathered near the Capitol steps. Inside, Jasmine Crockett returned to her work. Her red folder, now empty, sat on the desk beside her tablet. But its contents were already echoing through the nation. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a shift. In the days that followed, the hearing became the center of a national storm. Every major outlet ran continuous coverage. The image of Donald Trump Jr., head down and pale-faced, juxtaposed with Jasmine Crockett sitting poised and composed, became symbolic. Evidence versus entitlement. Cable news anchors debated not whether wrongdoing had occurred, but how deep it ran. Legal analysts dissected every word of the transcript, while political commentators speculated on the fallout for the Trump family. On social media, clips of Jasmine's calm interrogation were viewed millions of times. Memes exploded. Hashtags, like Crockett effect and truth over power, surged across timelines. But inside her congressional office, Jasmine avoided the spotlight. She declined most television interviews. When a prominent national anchor called her directly, her chief of staff politely replied that the congresswoman was focused on committee responsibilities. When leadership from her own party pushed for a press tour, she responded with a single sentence. I didn't do this to trend. I did it to serve. Instead, she returned to the basics: briefings, hearings, and most importantly, her constituents. She hosted a town hall just 5 days after the hearing, sitting shoulder to shoulder with residents who didn't ask about politics. They asked about water infrastructure, rent control, school safety. Jasmine answered every question with the same precision she had used in the committee room. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the Justice Department accelerated its investigation. Federal prosecutors issued subpoenas to key Trump Organization executives. Investigators moved to secure phone records, internal memos, and financial statements. Michael Lemansky, the former DOT official caught in the text with Trump Jr., abruptly resigned and agreed to cooperate. In a signed deposition, he confirmed the authenticity of the messages, detailing how federal infrastructure contracts were redirected to benefit private developments backed by Trump-linked interests. The consequences were swift. Portions of the West Barbridge contract were suspended. Funds earmarked for underserved communities were redirected to their originally intended recipients. Long-delayed infrastructure improvements began moving forward again. Bridges repaired. Roads widened. Transit projects revived. For many, this was the real outcome. Not the headlines, not the political humiliation, but tangible changes, real consequences that rippled outward from the quiet, deliberate dismantling of deceit in that hearing room. 3 weeks after the hearing, as the national spotlight remained fixed on the fallout, Jasmine received a handwritten note slid under her office door. It was from the Republican chairman of the committee. It read, Representative Crockett, while we differ greatly on policy, I want to acknowledge the standard you upheld during the IHU investigation. In 12 years of service, I've rarely witnessed such thorough and principled questioning. You honored the institution. She placed it in her desk drawer next to another note, a letter from a young public defender in Dallas. That note simply said, "You reminded me why I chose this work." Those acknowledgments, Jasmine believed, mattered more than the viral applause. They reflected something deeper, a trust in integrity, in evidence, in the slow, patient force of justice. 6 weeks later, the Justice Department held a press conference. Charges were filed. Donald Trump Jr. was formally indicted on counts of fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to manipulate federal contracts. 3 senior Department of Transportation officials, including Lemansky, were named in the satire indictment as well. The image of Trump Jr. entering the courthouse flanked by his legal team filled the front pages. He didn't speak. Cameras captured the same vacant expression that had followed him out of the hearing room. This time, there would be no red tie, no smirk, only a gray suit and a future dangling in uncertainty. Outside her Texas district office, Jasmine spoke, briefly to reporters. "Today's indictments remind us of something simple," she said. "That evidence matters, that preparation matters, and that no one, not even someone with wealth, power, and a famous last name, is above the law." The crowd applauded, but Jasmine raised a hand to quiet them. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration, about making sure communities that have been overlooked get the funding and attention they deserve. It's about making the system work. A senior citizen standing near the back of the crowd called out, "You showed him, Congresswoman, you put him in his place." Jasmine gave a small smile but shook her head. "No," she said gently. "That hearing wasn't about putting someone in their place. It was about putting evidence in its rightful place, in front of the American people, in front of the law. And that belongs to all of us, not just me." That perspective, that this wasn't personal but principled, continued to shape everything she did in the months that followed. While some in Washington urged her to capitalize on the moment, to ride the wave to higher office or broader fame, she declined. She remained focused on the work. She kept showing up at town halls, school visits, and housing meetings. She kept digging into policy briefings. She kept doing the slow, quiet work of governance, and quietly, something began to shift in the corridors of Congress. Her colleagues, especially those who had dismissed her as just a freshman, now sought her advice. She was invited into more closed-door discussions. She was tapped to serve on other oversight investigations, not because she was loud, but because she was thorough. And that was the legacy that mattered most to her. Not the headlines, not the memes, but the idea that someone with a legal pad, 3 folders, and relentless focus could still hold power to account in a system too often numbed by noise. 3 months after the hearing, the shockwaves had not faded. The Justice Department's case against Donald Trump Jr. was advancing steadily. Depositions were underway. Key figures in the Department of Transportation had flipped, trading silence for immunity. Investigators unearthed more communications, more bank transfers, and more ties between the Trump Organization and government insiders. The West Bar Bridge scandal was no longer just a headline. It had become a landmark case in federal accountability. But Jasmine Crockett never treated it that way. Not in her language, not in her posture, not in the way she carried on with her work. When a reporter asked her during a congressional recess if she felt like a hero, she simply responded, "Heroes don't do paperwork. I do a lot of paperwork." And it was true. She remained immersed in the daily grind. Committee reports, case reviews, constituent concerns. She walked the marble halls with the same quiet confidence she had brought into the hearing room. If anything had changed, it was how others looked at her. Lawmakers who once dismissed her now stopped her in the halls to ask how she structured her casework. Junior staffers who once walked past her office now dropped off handwritten thank you notes. One even left a note tucked between 2 folders. "I want to ask questions like you someday." 6 months after the hearing, Jasmine was walking back from a budget committee session when her aide intercepted her with a new update. "Indictments just dropped," he said. "They're going after 3 more people." She nodded. "Which departments?" "DOT Finance, and 1 former Trump org board member." She said nothing for a few seconds, just pressed the elevator button and stepped inside. When she exited back onto her floor, reporters were already gathering near her office. She waved them off. "Later. Right now I've got a housing proposal to finalize." She didn't dodge the media. She just didn't indulge them. When she did speak, she kept it simple. On the day of the expanded indictments, she released one short statement outside her district office. Accountability doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, it's procedural, it's frustrating, but when done right, it's real. Today's indictments are not a win for me. They're a win for the communities that were ignored while others took what wasn't theirs. Then she turned and walked back inside. Inside her office, things looked as they always had. Neat. Organized. Her desk was covered not in news clippings or memorabilia, but constituent letters, budget proposals, and town hall invitations. On one side of her wall hung a small, unframed note card. On it was a quote from her grandmother written in Jasmine's own hand. "Dignity isn't what you claim. It's what you show when everything is on the line." It had become her compass, a reminder of why she was here, and why, even after everything, she still answered every call personally from her district when time allowed. One day, months after the hearing, she received a phone call from a young woman in Dallas. She was a first-year public defender. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "After that hearing, I stopped questioning whether I belonged in this field." Jasmine paused. "You do," she replied. "You belong. Just make the evidence speak louder than the noise." The woman laughed, and Jasmine did too. Then they hung up, and Jasmine went back to work. That's how it continued. No book deal. No grandstanding on cable news. Just work. When her name came up as a possible Senate candidate, she deflected. "I'm not done here yet," she told her chief of staff. "There's still so much broken that needs fixing." That same week, she returned to her district and visited a local school. A 6th grader stood up during Q&A and asked, "How did you stay so calm when that guy lied?" Jasmine smiled. "Because I knew the truth. And I knew I had the receipts." The room of kids laughed, but she added, "And because if you let someone's power scare you out of doing the right thing, they win twice." That line would go on, to be printed on classroom posters, tweeted by journalists, and quoted by professors teaching political ethics. But Jasmine didn't spend time celebrating her phrases going viral. She celebrated when funding came through for a flood prevention project in a neglected community, when her office helped resolve a family's housing appeal, when legislation she co-authored passed quietly on a Friday afternoon, with barely a headline, but with real-world results. That, for her, was the work. Donald Trump Jr.'s name faded slowly from the front pages. New scandals, new stories, new dramas emerged, but one image remained etched in public memory: Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, pulling open a red folder that rewrote the script in a room designed to protect the powerful. And years from now, when people spoke of oversight, justice, and how evidence can still matter in a system drowning in noise, they wouldn't remember the shouting or the political theater. They would remember how one woman, armed with nothing more than facts, patience, and 3 color-coded folders, brought the truth into the light. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it worked. And in an era where so many had begun to believe that truth no longer stood a chance, that was more powerful than anything a headline could offer. Jasmine Crockett didn't come to Congress for a moment. She came to do the work, and she did.